Day one, we built a desk out of a door and a couple of computer monitor boxes, and that was the start of what was then Richard Partington Architects.
We're generalists and as architects, and that's something that's maybe not very fashionable these days, but I think that's where architects bring real strength.
Things that have worked best for us is where we've helped clients to understand what's realistic from their project.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Rion Willard, and on today's episode, we are delighted to welcome two visionary architects from Studio Partington who are at the forefront of sustainable design and energy-efficient housing. First, we're joined by Colin Davis, a pioneer in the energy-efficient retrofit of the iconic Golden Lane estate. This groundbreaking project addresses the thermal performance of 7 listed buildings, focusing on reducing energy consumption, cutting carbon emissions, and preparing for future free of fossil fuel heating. Colin is also the creator of the recognized Construction Details website, a free and invaluable resource that provides pre-assessed thermal bridging details to support architects, builders, and energy assessors in meeting updated regulations such as Part L and the Future Homes Standard. Also with us is Suzanne Davenport, a lead associate at Studio Partington, where she has been an integral member of the team since 2005. Susan has an impressive portfolio spanning social housing, the refurbishment of listed buildings, and innovative design for older residents at Passive House Standard. Her projects include a stunning refurbishment of a Georgian building on Swanage Pier and contributions to influential publications on energy-efficient homes. Suzanne's approach combines a meticulous attention to detail with a commitment to delivering high-quality, sustainable design. Together, Colin and Suzanne share insights on how architects can champion environmentally and socially responsible design. In this episode, we discussed the innovative work that Studio Partington has done in terms of their research and their code analysis and their code writing and their technical expertise, which they've used on a number of different publications. We also look at the challenges that face architects who are working with local authorities and housing associations, particularly when it comes to sustainability and retrofit projects. And we also discussed the technology used behind Studio Partington and how they are able to consistently deliver excellent work with a surprisingly small team for the output that they are able to produce. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Suzanne Davenport and Colin Davis. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how we might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale. Suzanne and Colin, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you both?
Very good, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Excellent. Great to have you here. Colin, you are a director at Studio Partington, and Suzanne, you are an associate at the same company. Very excited to have you. You guys have got an amazing portfolio of work in the civic, residential, workplace realms, as well as a large amount of master plannings. I know last time we spoke with each other, one of the things that I was quite surprised at was actually to find out the size of your organization, which was a lot smaller than you might imagine, considering the kind of scale of the work that you guys are engaged in. I think that's really interesting, and we can talk a little bit about the sorts of things that you do and how the business operates. But welcome to the show. Very excited to have you here. And perhaps I could talk a little bit about both of you individually of how did you join Studio Partington? What's your story to getting to the position that you are right now? Perhaps we'll start with Suzanne first.
Okay, so I guess actually probably Colin and I have quite similar stories. So my story is joining as a Part 1 architect, so right at the beginning of my career, and finding lots of variety in the role, the types of buildings I've worked on, also doing guidance work as well, so writing as well as being an architect and becoming an author. So I've stayed with the business, but I've felt things have always changed through my career.
And Colin?
So I started working at Studio Partington on day one in 1998, when I had recently failed my first year of my diploma in pretty spectacular fashion, actually.
That's always a good, always a good story.
Get straight in there, yeah. No, I got very distracted when I'd moved to London, started my diploma, and was doing anything but studying. Failed the first year. Got an opportunity to redo it, but part-time, but was told by my mum she wasn't going to pay for it, so I'd better get a job. I ended up, through a couple of other jobs, meeting Richard, who had just handed his notice in at a bigger practice to set up as a sole practitioner, and he needed some help. So, day one, we built a desk out of a door and a couple of computer monitor boxes, and that was the start of what was then Richard Partington Architects. Mm-hmm. And that's grown over the years. I've been a director for probably 10 years now, maybe a bit more, with Richard and two other directors. So I've sort of grown up with the business, really.
And for both of you, how have, in your tenure at the company, how have you seen it change?
It's been through a number of sort of episodes, I'd say, or chapters, really, where the business started really building or designing speculative office buildings. Richard had a background of doing that for a number of commercial clients, and that's sort of what we carried on doing for the first few years of the practice, just building speculative office buildings on sort of greenfield sites outside of London, and then we had an opportunity and a sort of desire to move into other areas, and specifically sort of housing, and so I'd say that there was an interesting sort of cross fertilization, really, from days of designing office buildings and learning a lot about sort of construction technology and really efficient sort of building practices. And when we started working on housing, that was an interesting conversation with sort of house building clients, whether they be private developers, local authorities, contractors. There was a sort of slightly different mindset in house building, still is probably in some instances, but bringing some of that sort of construction technology across to housing it was a sort of springboard, really, into where we are now, which is, I would say most of our work hangs around some form of housing. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that be, large mixed-use developments in London, or Suzanne's just jumped off a meeting, where she's working on writing some new government guidance on modern methods of construction, and so we have this sort of very broad range of work, but sort of at the center of it tends to be some sort of housing brief, so yeah, it's and then it's changed a bit in scale as well, as maybe many practices did. We grew through the sort of early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then 2007 and 8 hit, and the house building industry collapsed, so we shrunk, and then we've grown a little bit, and we've hovered around the sort of size we are now, which is sort of 12 to 15 people for a while, and that feels a nice, it's a nice size where everybody knows each other, very well. Maybe too well, but everybody knows all of the projects. There's a very direct connection between all levels of the practice and clients and the projects, and so we find that works well for us, and I think our clients find that comforting as well, to know that they can more or less talk to anybody in the practice about any project, and somebody will at least be able to help, if not have a really sort of in-depth knowledge of projects. And the nice thing is that people like Suzanne has been in the business for a long time as well, and has grown and developed with it. So in that respect, it feels like a little bit of a family where people develop and stay at the practice and evolve.
I think for me, the other thing is we're quite a diverse group of individuals, and I think there's always been an ethos in the practice to playing to your strengths and your abilities, and you could have the same job title, like associate, like I do, with someone else in the practice, but my colleague Nick has a totally different role. Like, I've more majored on the side of communication, writing guidance, activities he doesn't even participate in. So I think there's a real strength in being quite flexible and quite diverse and developing individual skills, but while also doing something that's maybe, I think Colin and I talked about this a bit before the interview, like that we're generalists and as architects, and that's something that's maybe not very fashionable these days, but I think that's where architects bring real strength, and as a small business we can bring real expertise onto projects by having this general approach, and potentially not getting kind of too focused on specialisms, but being able to see the bigger picture.
Could you guys talk a little bit about your individual roles? So obviously, like, what does it mean to be an associate? What does it mean to be a director? What kind of things fall under your stewardship? I know, Suzanne, that you're involved a lot with the kind of, as you said there, the marketing parts of the business, and Colin, there's also a kind of strategic business element as well to your role.
Yeah, I think the roles, we've kind of made them our own as well. So I think I have a particular interest in the business to some extent, and the marketing of it, and the finding new work. So we were talking just now about the kind of shifts in the practice and the different kind of work we've done, and Colin was talking about the real focus on housing that we've really had for quite a few years now, the kind of mid part of the business, perhaps after the focus on office buildings and industrial to some extent as well. But now increasingly we've started to, a large percentage, if not the majority of our work is now focused on retrofit, and I think that was something we were able to actively target as well, or to kind of realize that a lot of our interest was lying in that direction, and to develop. It's always very hard to show a direct link, but to try and develop contacts in that area and develop that kind of work. So that was an aspect that I felt I was able to contribute to the business, and had the freedom to be able to develop.
I mean, yeah, my role feels quite broad. I think that's the reality of a small business, is that sort of echoing the sort of, we're generalists as architects, but we're also generalists in the business sense as well. So my sort of brief, if you like, in my role as a director, it covers both being a director of projects, so offering sort of strategic guidance to clients and the team on projects and leading projects, but on a business level, we tend to sort of divvy up some of the sort of business management roles, and my role has really been to one kind of lead on the sort of strategies for kind of quality control, but also our sort of business ethos, really, what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, and sort of trying to drive that through the practice, really, rather than it just being my thing that I sit here and say this is how we do things. Trying to roll that out through the practice, and then with the other directors, we sort of share a sort of business planning role as well. So all the sort of normal stuff of sort of fee forecasts and ongoing sort of the sort of business maintenance side of things. So just making sure that we are keeping things moving along as best we can. Which isn't easy at the moment. In all honesty, isn't easy at the moment. It's been 2000 and the 2007-2008 recession was very difficult, and I think I felt that was quite a brutal experience, seeing a business shrink from sort of 30 people down to 5 or 6 in a really short space of time was pretty brutal and pretty traumatic. But we recovered and carried on, and to some extent it while the last couple of years has felt like it's a more elongated version of that. We've managed to keep the business around the same sort of size, but it's hard work. It's trying to maintain a practice and keep it busy and keep it occupied when people aren't necessarily commissioning so many new buildings is a challenge.
Was the focus on housing, did that emerge as a kind of response to things that happened, say 2007, 2008? I know for so many practices that kind of period is it's often a very pivotal place in a practice's history if they kind of survived it, because there was lots of lessons learned from it.
Yeah.
And it's where specialisms emerge. Did the housing focus emerge from that, or was it more recent?
I think that was there already. I'd say the thing that the sort of pivot that happened at that point was maybe to try and not be solely dependent on building. Now I've got to be careful what I say. We firmly believe in architects being involved in building projects from the outset through to completion. We don't really like the concept of just working up to planning or or purely conceptual work, and so we try to avoid that. But I suppose the thing that we added to the business that has added an element of sort of resilience is the guidance writing and policy work, which has really varied actually from so a couple of current examples. As I said, Suzanne is working on a document that I don't really know how much I could say about, but she could talk about that maybe in a minute. But one of the things that the practice has delivered is called Recognized Construction Details, which is an online service that provides pre-calculated SI values for house builders, smaller house builders, architects, designers, as part of the increased thermal efficiency that we're trying to deliver through housing. It's no longer possible to just use default values for thermal bridging calculations, and so led by some players in the sort of masonry industry, we developed a resource where we we modelled, 500 typical junctions, enabling people to freely download pre-calculated psi values, and that sort of, I think what we found is that sort of work when either government or developers are not building things, they look to do other things, and there's often a sort of, as construction is tailing off, that sort of work has picked up again, and it's a great, it's very interesting work. It isn't designing buildings, but what's nice about it sometimes is the projects are a bit shorter. If you take a typical, larger construction project, you're maybe working on something for 5-6 years, whereas to take some time out and spend 3 months working on a guide to Part L of the building regulations or something like that it can be a really nice focused bit of research, learning. There's design in it, because I think the reason clients come to us is that they like that we're good technical thinkers, but we can also communicate ideas graphically, and offer that as a whole package, really. And so those projects can be a nice, they're good for cash flow and managing through hard times, but they're also just can be a bit of fun, really.
How
as a break.
How did you start getting those kinds of commissions, and what does your role look like in the execution? Like, what are you producing?
I think our role, it can be quite varied, actually, and I'd say probably the key thing with the commissions is a series of repeat clients, actually. So some of the very first guides I wrote we're working for Joseph Rowntree Foundation, so we're actually doing a large scale 540 home development there that we've been doing for it's probably the key project of the practice, and we've been doing for 15 years. But a lot of that, their remit is to research into fuel poverty. So a lot of really excellent research projects went on around that project, and part of that was disseminating information. So we took really technical analysis that would be done by universities and then created guides. So we were doing everything from what we were writing, interpreting a kind of technical paper, to the layout of the whole guide, illustrating the guide. So it's a very kind of all-rounded approach. And then we've used a similar kind of way of working to write a whole series of guides for the NHBC, building warranty providers. But the content of that has been really varied, from quite technical types of things like Colin was talking about, where either we are working with other consultants who are actually doing energy modelling, often around explaining things like approved documents. So we've got those kind of guides, to really quite discursive ones, which have been more the ones that I've been involved with writing for the NHBC. So across a whole range of subjects around, to take some example, like say the advantages of new homes, modern methods of construction, the history of modern methods of construction, conventional house building maybe not being as conventional as you think. Been really interesting projects, because we've been given very free rein. Like NHBC maybe would come with a single sentence or a particular area of focus, and then we'd really lead where we think the guide or even website, we have different outputs these days for what it is as well. And so they've been really nice things to be involved with. And then on the other side of that, it's also strayed from the kind of more graphic illustration, kind of explaining things to lay people approach. It's also strayed into the more actually writing technical guidance, being a technical author. So in the past, I've written approved documents for particular jurisdictions around Part L, and then currently what I'm involved with, which Colin was just alluding to, is a document called PAS 8700, which is going to be a new publicly available specification for modern methods of construction, which has just gone through the public consultation process. So that is all just written content, very technical, hopefully helping the industry by having a really clear set of guidance.
How do these guides feed back into your own architectural work, and do they provide opportunities for winning work as well?
Absolutely. I think you sort of asked in the previous question, maybe paraphrasing, but why us? Why is it a good role? And I think there's real parallels between the role of an architect in designing and delivering a building and our role on those written projects, where the reason I think people like working with us is that everything that we do is firmly rooted in delivering something, and whether that's a really deep understanding of construction and construction technology to inform a really robust piece of architecture that's going to deliver a great place for somebody to live, or whether that's taking on that role in bringing together a lot of disparate people that are trying to feed into defining a technical standard. I think it's the same core strength, really, which is about having this general overview of things. So we have some really strong skills, but also we have a general interest in everything that's contributing to either a project or a publication. And I think that went a little bit out of fashion. It's interesting. You mentioned specialisms coming out of that period in 2008, and I think that did happen. And specialisms can be great, right? And they're essential as delivery of buildings has got more complex, and it is essential to have specialists, but you also need to have generalists as well that have an overview of everything, and I think that's where we're maybe shifting now. I think one of our challenges being smaller was always big practices can support and offer specialists, whether that be graphics people or consultation people who specialize in consultation, model makers, SAP assessors, whatever it is, that larger practices with more projects can support a plethora of specialists. And I personally always found that, like I felt for a long time that I wanted our practice to be like that, but came to the realization it wasn't really possible, which has meant we've ended up with a lot of key collaborators, so we have a good team of people that are very close to us that can offer specialist input, but that our strength is much more to have a better overview, and understand everything that's contributing to a project. So even if we're not delivering it, we are very aware of what a specialist might need to deliver and how they feed in, and make sure that things are well coordinated and well informed.
Does any of the work, the written work or the research work, does any of that ever become self-directed, where you guys have an idea for an area of research that you want to invest time and resource into, and then you do that, and then you've got a kind of body of knowledge that you're looking to either put into a project or put into another one of these kind of documents or guidelines?
Yes, and I think it really in the early days, I'd say absolutely, and it came from a place where I think we had a strong and well-informed interest in delivering sustainability, at a point where it wasn't such a general desire. So from the start of the practice, really, in 1998, and so there was an iteration of the practice where we did employ, people who had specialisms in sustainability, maybe had studied architecture and then gone off to become energy assessors, and so we had an element of that specialism in the business, and I think it was that. The fact that we had taken that on as a way to learn and to research how we should how that knowledge should impact our projects, in a way that knowledge led on to the first commissions for the sort of guidance writing, which was for an organization that was called the Zero Carbon Hub, which was a sort of quasi-government body set up to try and inform the house building industry of, how to deliver zero carbon, really. And lots of that research work grew out of that. That initial contact. I'd say, maybe less so now, where time and money and resources are quite tight. It's difficult to support that, a time like the last year that we've been through. But certainly when we're doing bigger commercial projects, we try and make sure that, if there's money coming out of those, that it is invested into giving people the opportunity to go off and study or learn a new skill. Absolutely.
I think one of the key things with the writing is we don't do these things in isolation. Like we've made amazing groups of contacts through doing this kind of work. And actually, I think sometimes one thing can lead into another and you might not expect it. So, the interest in MMC was kind of sparked by the NHBC making a suggestion that we write a guide about the history of MMC. But then through that work and planning another guide with them, which actually hasn't happened yet, we ended up kind of falling into this world of working for the BSI group and writing a specification, which is a whole different skill set. So we haven't so far, I don't think we've directly come up with an idea and then gone out to fund it, although we have discussed that as possibly something we could look towards in the future.
It's very interesting as well then, you've got a kind of body of knowledge that you've been developing, and a kind of focus in and around housing, and that you're also kind of pioneering in the world of retrofit. How difficult is this to have or to find clients who are interested and aligned with your architectural values, certainly around sustainability and retrofit, when on the surface of it, the short-term finances for your typical housing developers, it always, we're seeing so many kind of crazy things at the moment with buildings just being torn down that seem perfectly, an architect can look at them and sometimes they're classics like Robin Hood Gardens, and you're just like, how do you change a client's mind? How do you sell it? How do you make it work as both a business for you guys and for the developers?
A great question, and actually, sometimes you can't, and so, we have a whole range of work, and there are challenges which are maybe too great, that I think yeah, on any project really, you have to define what's an achievable element that you can influence and change and develop, and what are things that are possibly outside of your ability to change, and the retrofit work is really broad, and I think the things that have worked best for us is actually is where we've helped clients to understand what's realistic from their project, and to try and set really definable targets and goals from a retrofit project, and actually we that is very different depending on the project. So,
and we're going to take a pause right now with this great conversation with Suzanne and Colin. Please stay tuned for part 2, which will be released in just a few days.
Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together, so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, we'll give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.